Today's video is sponsored by Incogni. More on them in a jiff. Today I'm looking at Seven Sisters. This is one I've wanted to talk about for a while because I like the name. It's one of those rather poetic names you get on the underground that raises all sorts of questions, along with what is the relationship of the elephant to the castle? Why is the king so cross? Is a degree so worthless these days that Oxford graduates have to join the circus? The Seven Sisters are actually these trees here. I made a video about them a good couple of years ago, if not more. These actually aren't the first Seven Sisters. I think they're the third or fourth, and traditionally they are planted by Seven Sisters. Although last time I believe they couldn't actually find a family with 7 daughters, so I think it was 7 women who were sisters, but not all to each other. That is also why there is this tile motif on the Victoria Line platform, designed by Hans Unger. The tiles on the Victoria Line all represent something relating to the local area, but the history of Seven Sisters Station goes back long before the Victoria Line. The first station here was actually what's now the Overground station, and dates back to 1872. Actually, fun fact, when Finsbury Park Station opened in 1861, it was originally called Seven Sisters Road. Well, that's not a very fun fact, but it is a fact. Seven Sisters, the one that's still called that, was built by the Great Eastern Railway, as were an awful lot of the branch lines in North East London. Basically, the Great Eastern Railway discovered early on that there was money to be made from commuter trains. In fact, it was about the only profitable aspect of their operation. The Great Eastern Railway was a huge company controlling a huge amount of track, but much of it ran through areas with relatively light traffic. So commuter trains were basically what supported the rest of the Great Eastern operation, and so they built a lot of suburban railways. But that's not the only reason this line was built. When the Great Eastern Railway was planned, or rather its predecessors, the Eastern Counties Railway and the Northern and Eastern Railway, all of their trains were routed through Stratford. That's because land was expensive in the City of London, so you wanted to acquire as little as possible. That was fine at first, but as traffic increased, Stratford became a bottleneck. Residents of Enfield and Edmonton were annoyed too. The route was an indirect one, swinging a long way east through Stratford before swinging back west for the approach to Bishopsgate Station. And there were other communities that had been wholly missed by the railways, who wanted in on the action. If you're curious about Bishopsgate Station, that was the Great Eastern Railway's terminus. It was actually in Shoreditch, and you can still see the ruins. They're slated to be redeveloped, I understand. But that's neither here nor there right now. Back then, Shoreditch was a rather poor part of London, and passengers hated having to get off there and make their own way into the city. So the Great Eastern planned a new terminus at Liverpool Street. You may have heard of it. While they were about it, they decided to build a bypass line running from Enfield Town, through Tottenham and Hackney, to what would become Liverpool Street Station. Permission for all this was granted in 1864, but it took a long time to get built because, remember, the Great Eastern Railway didn't have a lot of money. It certainly didn't help that in 1866 the Bank of Overend, Gurney and Company collapsed, taking a bunch of railway projects with it. It's going to take them forever to recover from that, so I reckon this is a good time to tell you about this video's sponsor, Incogni. These days it's harder and harder to keep your data safe online. As a matter of fact, I'd say it's almost impossible, one way or another. I'm as guilty as anyone else of clicking yes on a website without thinking. The trouble is, all of that adds up. Brokers buy data from websites, and that enables them to build a profile of you. Say you apply for health insurance. Well, the data brokers can tell your insurer exactly which aches and pains you've been looking up. And don't even get me started on the hazards of the Online Safety Act. But it gets worse. I'm sure you've heard about various websites getting hacked or leaked, or just having some idiot put people's private data on public show. With that information, shady people can steal your identity, and then it's open season. Falsified documents, loans and credit cards in your name, and before you know it, you're being hounded over all sorts of things you didn't even do. No one needs that kind of nonsense. Fortunately, Incogni exists. See, legally, these websites have to delete your data if requested, but you can bet they hold on to it like a bulldog with a postman's leg. If you can even find everyone who has your data. Incogni does all that for you. You sign up and authorize them to work on your behalf, and they go around making all the legal requests for you. They keep you updated on their progress so you can see them working, and you can feel a lot safer online. Viewers of this channel can get 60% off an annual plan by visiting incogni.com/jago, link in the description below, and entering the code JAGO. Take control of your data and stay safe. Now, I wonder if the Great Eastern Railway have finished building that line yet. The line finally opened on the 22nd of July, 1872. Back then, the entrance was actually at the other end of the platforms, on West Green Road. You can quite clearly see where the staircase used to be. There was no goods yard, which was quite unusual in those days, although there were some private industrial sidings nearby until the 1940s. Initially, Seven Sisters was just your bog-standard suburban station, but the company already had bigger plans. While they were trying to get the line built, they were also applying for permission for a line known as the Palace Gates branch. In 1865, construction began on a new entertainment venue in North London, to be known as Alexandra Palace. The railway companies of North London were convinced that Alexandra Palace would be as big a success as Crystal Palace had been in South London. So of course they all wanted to be the one serving it. There was a somewhat mad idea to build a branch line from Seven Sisters to Wood Green, so far so good, then up the fearsome hill to the palace itself. This would have been a joint venture with the Muswell Hill Estates and Railway Company. What's not actually clear is how the line would have got up the hill, which was way too steep for any conventional steam locomotive. In any case, the Great Eastern dropped out in 1869, and the Muswell Hill Company would instead connect their line up to the Edgware, Highgate and London Railway. That line is long gone, but the Palace Station is still there. The branch instead terminated here at a station that would be known as Palace Gates. Contrary to the name, it's quite a hike from the actual palace. As it turned out, the palace was not the guaranteed money spinner its promoters had hoped for, but the branch was intended as much to serve the intermediate suburbs as the palace itself. The line opened in 1878 and Seven Sisters became a junction station. In 1880, a connection was made from the Palace Gates branch to what's now the Suffragette Line, aka the Goblin, aka the Gospel Oak to Barking Line, aka the Tottenham and Hampstead Junction Railway. But the service over this line only lasted a little over a year, from January 1880 to February 1881. In 1887, another service was introduced, this one from Palace Gates to North Woolwich, and that lasted until 1863, when it was cut back to a service between Tottenham Hale and North Woolwich. I mention all this just because I wish some of those connections still existed. Imagine being able to get all the way from Alexandra Palace to the Docklands on one train today. The commuter trains proved very successful. The Great Eastern's lines enabled people to move out of the slums of the city to the emerging suburbs. Well, in some cases they were forced by the railway's demolition works, and by law the Great Eastern had to provide cheap tickets by way of compensation. In addition to the huge number of passengers, the trains were also popular with buskers and preachers. The buskers and preachers were not necessarily popular with the huge number of passengers. But the early 20th century brought competition from trams and buses, and even the odd proposal for an underground line. The trams and buses were cheap and actually could climb hills very well. The obvious solution was to electrify the Great Eastern suburban lines to enable them to provide faster and more frequent services. The same thing was being done quite successfully on lines in southwest London. But electrification was expensive. The Great Eastern instead opted to introduce a high-intensity steam-hauled service over their suburban lines, running to a tight schedule. All sorts of measures were introduced to allow the maximum capacity to be squeezed out of the lines from Liverpool Street. Additional platforms, dedicated tracks, engines ready to couple up to the outgoing service as soon as the incoming coaches arrived, and a series of coloured stripes along the tops of coaches to indicate destination and class, so passengers could see at a glance where to sit. This last feature led the trains to be nicknamed the Jazz Service. It was an impressive operation to be sure, but it didn't ultimately solve anything. In the case of the lines to Enfield and Palace Gates, they had a lot of gradients to tackle, and the little engines consumed a lot of coal along the way, which made them expensive to operate, and passengers were still being lost to trams and buses. Electrification, again, would have solved the coal problem. In 1923, the Great Eastern Railway was taken over by the London and North Eastern Railway, which, in theory, should have made them more financially solvent, but it turned out that most of the other companies the LNER had inherited were also pretty poor. So the lines through Seven Sisters just plodded along. In 1930, the Palace Gates branch got a connection to the Hertford Loop, and again imagine the possibilities today. London Transport played with the idea of taking the Palace, Gates and Enfield town branches over in the 1930s, which would have made Seven Sisters a tube station long before it actually was. As things played out, no such luck. In 1948, the railways of Britain were nationalised, and at last, finally, electrification could go ahead. Well, eventually. The Enfield town branch was electrified in 1960, and then it took 2 more years to figure the technical difficulties out. The Palace Gates branch sat there expectantly awaiting its turn, which would not come. It seemed that the writing was on the proverbial, and in January 1963 the line closed to passengers. Freight continued until the following year, but thereafter, Seven Sisters was no longer a junction station. Not to worry though, because another interchange was on its way. An underground line that would become known as the Victoria Line, although in the early stages it might have been known as the King Vic, the Walvic, or the Viking Line. See, the problem with the lines in northeast London was not that people didn't want to travel by train, but that the trains they had were infrequent. Electrification couldn't do anything about the overcrowding of the lines converging on Liverpool Street. It didn't help that British Railways had this attitude that if a line wasn't popular, they should reduce the service, which of course made it less convenient and therefore less popular still. Anyway, so, one of the aims of the Victoria Line was to provide an alternative route for residents of the northeastern suburbs. That route would change a lot between the earliest ideas for the line and the one we actually got. That would make a video in itself, and perhaps someday it actually will. It might have terminated at Hitchin, or Angel Road, or Waltham Cross. There was definitely going to be a station around here, but the question was, would it be at Seven Sisters, or the nearby South Tottenham? As it happened, it was a sort of compromise between the two. Seven Sisters was the one chosen, but the station itself would undergo a total rebuild. The main entrance would be relocated from West Green Road to Seven Sisters Road, far closer to South Tottenham Station. The first section of the Victoria Line, from Walthamstow Central to Highbury and Islington, opened on the 1st of September 1968. Seven Sisters is on this section, but it wasn't complete at that stage. The new booking hall wouldn't open until the 1st of December that year. The stations on the Victoria Line were very much built to a budget, and isn't that just a running theme in this video? The government had mixed feelings about the idea of building a tube line at all, so London Transport pared everything back to the bare minimum. There's really not much to say about the architecture of the Victoria Line station here. As it transpired, the bare minimum approach resulted in stations that became overcrowded very easily, not helped at Seven Sisters by the fact that it's the closest underground station to the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, even though there are additional exits to the main one. In 2015, the Enfield Town branch became part of the London Overground, which was a programme to revitalise suburban lines that weren't reaching their full potential. In 2022, the line became known as the Weaver Line, commemorating the historical textile industry in the area. But there may be more to come in the future. Seven Sisters is down as one of the stations on Crossrail 2. If that does happen, the platforms will actually extend underground all the way from Seven Sisters to South Tottenham, connecting both stations together. This has the potential to completely change the character of the station and indeed possibly the area it serves. But that's all in the future, if, as I say, it happens at all. So that is the story of Seven Sisters, from the 1860s through to some point in the possible future. The number of services that there have been or could have been frankly took me by surprise when I wrote this script. And it all seems a little incongruous for a relatively minor station. Still, history has a way of surprising you. Well, I do hope you enjoyed today's video. If so, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. Today's main sources were All Stations to Enfield Town by Graham Dalling, London's Local Railways by Alan A. Jackson, and The Victoria Line by Mike Horn. I would like, as ever, to thank my donors on Ko-fi, on Patreon, and here on YouTube for your generous support. You are the coloured stripe to my four-wheeled coach. Thanks also to Incogni for sponsoring today's video. Check out the link in the description below to take advantage of their generous offer. And I will see you all again very soon. Cheerio.